There's one over there. You have to hold it down.
I get to hold it. Skinner, Educopia Institute. I'm wondering, I first off, commend you both on your work and on this presentation. This was very exciting. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about the economics of preservation and where that fits into this, because what we're looking at in the model that you're putting forward is a system whereby I think the actual output of scholarly communications is going to increase dramatically. Without the peer review component happening in a gatekeeping sort of way, you wind up with, inevitably, more publications. And right now, one of the biggest problems that's happening in digital scholarship is that we don't have effective infrastructures, much less efficient infrastructures, that can preserve this content for the long haul, and it's impossible to imagine a scholarly future where that's not going to be a devastating situation because we're going to be losing content that needs to be there for the citation. Can you talk a little bit about the economics of preservation and where you see that fitting into the scholarly publishing model?
Yeah, and it's a very good point. I wouldn't say it's in any way solved or there's any sort of positive picture about it, but I mean, people refer to this era that we're in as almost the future dark ages, because there's so much we're putting out there now into the world that is not being preserved in any way. Not just academic content, just emails, YouTube, everything. A lot of it is very transient and sometimes deliberate, of course. So, at the very least, in the current scholarly infrastructure, the journal infrastructure that's evolved, and again has evolved as a result of having a subscription base and infrastructure. There are obviously archiving solutions. There's Locks, Clocks, Portico, things like that we're members of. In the future archiver is potentially something like Figshare, and Mark's up there and he's going to be talking to us later. But he has got a model apparently that operates at scale, archiving a vast amount of stuff, applying DOIs and doing it, as it were, properly. When you layer on top the fact that storage costs are coming down every year, I mean, really, the 40% drop that we saw Amazon and Google put in were on the storage costs. So at some point in the future, the act of storing this vast amount of extra content that we're producing that really is not that data heavy, that content heavy. It's text and images and things. It's not the terabytes of information that CERN puts out, for example. At some point, you can store it, at least at a very reasonable price in the future. The question is whether or not there's going to be structures and infrastructure in the environment that actually does that properly and actually ensures the longevity. So I don't actually know the answer, but I think the answer might be with Mark, actually, or something like what Mark's doing. And he's one of the very few examples of somebody trying to do this out there. I'm interested in hearing his talk later, but yeah. But Mark, actually, and so I'm looking in that direction. The next question, I mean, Mark, you had your hand up as well.
Yep, I think, can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. So my questions were to do with, it's kind of a two-part question, you could ignore half of it if you want, but it was to do with the idea that you touched on eLife, and a lot of these new business models and these new journals are coming out of either basically not out of the institution. They're forming as companies. And then you see things like eLife that could be, they're doing it for free at the moment with the knowledge that they're going to charge at some point. And is there a problem with funders and maybe even institutions looking to do it themselves, which actually harms innovation in this space? Because you've done well with you've got a great business model, but it could be difficult for other new publishers to come about because of the fact the competition is, well, there's a new journal that's being built and they're giving away their services for free, so you can't innovate until the time comes when they actually start charging for it, and they already have a user base and have an advantage there. And the second part of that is, do you have a concern about maybe if, say, Scientific Reports gets bigger than PLOS with certain things that are going on, Scientific Reports being a PLOS clone, And should we be concerned? Do you think it doesn't matter if the journal's going away? It doesn't matter where you publish, and we can publish in Elsevier open access as happy as we can publish in Piaget open access?
Yeah, so I guess the first question is, to what effect does some of these new entrants stifle competition and innovation? Really the bigger stifler of innovation is what we're dealing with, again, historical. It's things like the impact factor, the conservatism of the academia, the fact that academia has been trained to think that bucketing up good content into a sort of prestigious journal is in some way a good thing, and they're determined not to move off of that. Those kind of effects have stifled innovation much more than something like an eLife. Going forwards, whether or not an eLife that can just sort of throw a lot of money and resources at a loss-making business model, whether that's a good thing. I think there's a lot of opportunities still. I mean, you've got eLife, which is a very visible thing, but ultimately the amount of money that they've put into it to fund it is not vast in the scale of global library budgets or university budgets. There's no reason universities couldn't have done something like what eLife. Except that I think historically, again, they try and avoid, perhaps telling academics where to publish. But historically, the university press was, founded and subsidized by universities back in the day, and perhaps the concept has moved on a bit. But I'm surprised myself that, universities, I know, the Harvard, open access Journal of Harvard or something, that hasn't happened yet. And and there's thousands of universities in the world. So I think there's an opportunity there still for plenty of innovation. Ultimately, I think what we have, the fact that we have a business model and that other publishers have a business model is an important thing. I think it's, it stops you getting fat or wasteful. It keeps you lean and innovative. And I think having a business model is actually a good thing, even if you've got a lot of competition from people that perhaps don't have a business model. Then I guess your question of, it's like, does it actually matter where it's published anymore? No, it doesn't. I mean, if Elsevier actually did it properly and ended up publishing a lot of OA content into this big cloud of stuff, and that's fine, But I think, that I don't think you need an Elsevier or a journal or anything like that to do this anymore in the future. Are there any questions from this side of the room? Yep, Rebecca.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Can you press the button? I can't hear you down here.
I'm trying. The news services you mentioned, peer review, evaluation, marketing, promotion, archiving, registration, preservation. Isn't that what journals already do? I mean, how is this really going to be better in the future? It just seems like, yes, they're doing it a little inefficiently right now, and they're getting away with it but perhaps journal prices are starting to, their growth is cutting down if you look at what people actually pay. So it's like, okay, yeah, they'll eventually come down because they have to, because libraries can't, and readers can't pay that much in the future. But I guess I'm wondering how much this is different from what the model already is.
Not sure I caught all of the questions. Could you just repeat the final point? Sorry.
To make those buttons easier. How different are these services, new services, are from what's already being done by journals?
Mm-hmm. And actually, so ultimately there isn't much difference, I think, in what they're going to do. They're attempting to do things like certification, registration, archiving, dissemination. The internet is the disseminator in that model. So these are the same services, but done obviously differently, done outside the journal package. And so, again, the concept is that you don't need to do those services within one journal bucket, in one journal package. Historically, you have, because it was the easiest way to organize it. But these can be the identical services almost, or at least the identical replacements of the services done outside the journal. Whether or not it's better, I think one of your points was actually, are they different, and actually, is that a better thing? I don't know if they're better. Yeah, I would hope so. But in many ways, it's sort of the evolution of a free market. These services will evolve, and if people want them, they'll use them and buy them. It's exactly like evolution, actually, isn't it? It may not necessarily win because it's the better solution. It'll win because it's the fitter solution in some way. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see where it goes. Yep.
I have a question to kind of build on Karen's question. Can you offer any advice for libraries, how we could help the transition? Your charts are very interesting, the transition to open access over the next few years, and progressions that I've heard from, internally discussed in companies like Elsevier, they're looking at these sorts of things. What role, as libraries, have this constant pressure on our budgets for journal subscriptions and whatnot, what role could you see for libraries to actively engage in this in a constructive way, in a helpful way, to help the transition to more sustainable models of publication? Can you offer us any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I get this question fairly often, and there's I guess a trite answer is like, you need to help us advocate with the faculty of this is a better way to do it, and you've just got to try it. And please give up your addiction to the impact factor, and don't use that for tenure decisions, because actually things like that are actually one of the biggest drag on innovation. Actually, the impact topic, a whole other talk. But so there's that level of advocacy. There's also a level of actually supporting new and innovative business models. Give some of them a try. Our institutional package for a university to sign up to is just $5,000, for example. It's the price of 1 year of rented access to one subscription journal. You could give us $5,000, which would actually fund 30, 40, 50 lifetime publication plans for your faculty. And for us, as a startup business, that's a decent chunk of money that helps us survive. For you, that's just perhaps a small, you could cancel some Elsevier subscription and shift the money around a little bit. So there's something, just as selfish as that. Please invest and try these experiments. But I think in many ways it's perhaps look forwards this few steps. Again, librarians are sort of creatures of their history. They're used to curating a collection and worrying about journals and worrying about perhaps almost the mechanics of collecting a beautiful collection of content in your beautiful building. Reinvent yourselves, move forwards to that sort of future of being information specialists of how to find the best articles no matter where they're published, how to evaluate whether something is properly peer-reviewed and whether it joined the literature in the right way, and educate your users that way. Again, it's more of a long-term change perhaps in how you guys do business. They're all coming from over here. There's one there again. Yep.
I'm curious about the mega journal model and how it accounts for disciplinary differences, both within the sciences and then outside of the sciences, and how you see the ability of PLOS ONE or PeerJ to serve, whether there are challenges there in the ways that different scholars discover, consume, reuse information, and a large journal that tries to kind of generically serve all of those different potential needs.
And yeah, so that's a great question, because that's, I think, the biggest failing of the mega journal, in particular PLOS ONE, stuff that it hasn't tackled and hasn't done very well at all, is the ability to publish everything, but treat everything individually, sort of within that giant cloud of content. So PLOS ONE, publishes from paleontology through to biochemistry, cell biology, everything in between. And there's no reason why it couldn't build technical solutions to show that content back to just the paleontologists. The paleontologists don't want to see the cell biology work and vice versa. At the moment, because the functionality is pretty poor in some of these bigger mega journals, it's sort of forced down their throat. But so I think it's a challenge to some of these new models to actually do exactly what you just said. how can they better address the needs of the individual communities and let them work together? I don't think there's any reason why they can't. It's just they haven't. You know, it's not an easy problem, but it's a problem they haven't addressed yet, and we also haven't done a great job on it either. They've sort of concentrated on getting the content in and publishing it, and not really concentrating on, and then what do we do with that content now that we know something about it, we know the subject area it's in, we know who was the editor, how it was peer-reviewed, and you know, what people want to read about it. So I think that's possibly the thing that's going to constrain the growth of this model, is like an inability to serve the needs of small communities within that large cloud. No good answer for it, except I'm sure there's a technical solution to most of the problem. But then ultimately publishing and academia and consuming content is it's a human endeavor, that there are communities as well that need to be, you know, built and created and sustained. But there's technical solutions to that. Facebook exists, and you can have a community of all your friends and family on Facebook, and there's no reason why you can't create the right structures within, you know, this big database of content base.
How about now? Okay. Please join me in thanking our keynote, Peter Binfield.